This is somebody's product, right? That they're emitting to the atmosphere. If they can make money off of it, it has a positive ROI, great, they'll do it. Oftentimes, this indicates operational issues. I always tell this analogy to staff here. When you see like the old truck on the road and the smoke coming out of the tailpipe, that guy doesn't need to care about emissions. He doesn't need to care about air quality. I mean, maybe he should, but what I can tell you is his engine's not running. It's burning wood. And he can either take the truck in, take it worked on his terms, or it can just be broken down on the side of the road when he's trying to make it to an important meeting or life event or whatever else. And so I'm saying this because emissions in and of themselves coming from this equipment can be indicative of something. They often are.
Hardware to Save a Planet explores the technical innovations that are giving us hope in the fight against climate change. Each episode focuses on a specific climate challenge and explores an emerging physical technology solution with the person bringing it into reality. I'm your host, Dylan Garrett. Hardware to Save a Planet is brought to you by Synapse. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to Hardware to Save a Planet. I'm happy to be here with Will Foyles, the co-founder and CEO of Project Canary. Project Canary is helping to eliminate methane leaks from industrial operations. This is a big deal because methane is a super potent greenhouse gas, something like 80 times more powerful than CO2 in the short term. And cutting those emissions is one of the fastest ways to slow climate change. They've developed a system that combines high-tech sensors with AI-powered software to continuously monitor methane emissions on sites like oil and gas facilities. They're helping to find leaks in real time so they can be addressed quickly. One thing that intrigued me about this story is that Will and his team started out by developing emission sensors, their own custom hardware for the oil and gas sector, but have since evolved to being focused on a software product that's hardware agnostic. I'm excited to hear more about that change in strategy. Will co-founded the company in 2019. Prior to that, he worked in energy finance and helped develop data acquisition technology for the energy sector. He also holds an MBA and a master's in environment and resources from Stanford. It seems to me that he really bridges the worlds of finance and climate tech in a unique way. Will and I had a chance to meet a bit a few weeks ago, and I was really impressed by Will, by your kind of passion and sort of very broad perspective on climate change and the climate tech sector in general. So I'm really excited to have you on the show. Thanks for joining.
Appreciate you having me. Feels like that software gets all the glitz and glamour. So it's great to hear people talking about hardware.
That's right. Let's do it. I'm curious to start just with a bit about kind of your background and your journey to this. So I saw you had a master's in finance and then a few years later went to Stanford for this, what looks like a dual degree, an MBA and an environment and resources master's degree. And then right after that, or around that same time, you founded Canary. I'm curious, what was driving that decision to go for those degrees at the time?
Just an interest in the energy space. A lot of it was the sustainability pledges that you're seeing out of companies. The short story is what I was doing before was I was really equity research, and I was trying to get my hands on differentiated data so you could not just be the 100th person to opine on whatever stock it may be. In doing so, I oftentimes found out what people were saying in the marketplace was at best incomplete and oftentimes purposefully mischaracterized if you really want to get down to it. So you see all these net zero pledges coming out from everything from airlines to software companies to you name it. And you start peeling back the onion and there really isn't that much there. Really what it was is kind of kicking the can down the road and making a future promise that other people would have to fulfill. Fine. Like I'm not here to judge, just call it what it is. And a lot of people really, they want to book a lot of the accolades up front and leave the hard work and cost to other folks down the road.
Did you guys start out with a specific focus on methane? Like you were seeing a big gap in sort of data for methane specifically?
That was kind of always where we were headed. At the very beginning, it was volatile organic compounds because in Colorado, there was a requirement to monitor for them. They have adjacency to obviously greenhouse gas emissions, but also hazardous air pollutants, things like benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene. You don't want to breathe them in. You don't want anyone in your family to breathe them in. Many of these industrial facilities, oil and gas facilities, were being accused of emitting for it. And so the state said, great, you have to measure for VOCs. The problem, just practically speaking, is there's many compounds in VOCs. So separating out propane versus benzene can't really do it without using something called a suma canister. And then we saw the VOCs as a surrogate for methane and just pushed into species and methane, measuring specifically for methane. not long thereafter.
I was hoping you could like help me characterize just the magnitude of the methane problem that you're addressing. I mean, I hear people talk about a lot like it's so much more potent than CO2, but then it has this like shorter half-life. There's a lot of sort of natural methane emissions, a lot of these sort of leaks and things. Like when you look at sort of what problem you're tackling, how big is that relative to say like the CO2 problem or our climate change challenge?
Great question. Depending on estimates, 25% to a third of human-induced climate change comes from. It's just staggering when you think about it, especially when you don't really hear about it spoken about all that much. With CO2, I like to say that we're still fighting over the second derivative, meaning that there's absolute levels of methane in the atmosphere. They're going up, and they're going up at an ever faster rate because the amount that we're putting into the atmosphere continues to rise year over year. So, like, we are a long way off from actually
Going the other
this.
direction.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
go over to methane though, and because of its short atmospheric residence, meaning how long it hangs around. So if we could just isolate 1 ton of methane and we emit it today, in roughly 11 years it'll be gone. On an instantaneous basis, it's 120 times more potent than CO2. So then where does this number 82.5 come from? Well, if it only lives around for 11 years, you get a lot of zeros in there. 11, 12, 13, 14. And it's not like it just on day one goes away at 11 years. Doesn't have a fuse on it. That's just general. So sometimes it goes away faster, slower, bleeds away. But if you had to choose a midpoint. So point being is if you can actually reduce the flow of methane to the atmosphere, the stock, meaning how much is in the atmosphere, will start to go down. And therefore you're reducing radiative force. If we reduce the amount of CO2 that we're putting into the atmosphere today, the absolute concentration is still going up. We need to do it. We should do
Right,
it.
as long as we continue putting it up.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Practically speaking, there's
Right.
It has an atmospheric resonance of its own because a whole bunch of effects being recycled in plants and a whole different part of the world. But you generally get my point. And so as a result, you're looking at a quarter to a third of the problem for human-induced climate change. And we can actually start to bring the problem down in the course of a decade with CO2. We're still going to be dealing with the consequences of what we did for the past 100 years, probably for the following 100 years, which means we got to get started now on that. But it's a much longer, slower arc to bend.
And where are we like trend wise? You know, human caused methane emissions, is that still going up? Have we plateaued? Are we going down? Where are we?
I wish I had better news for you. But the problem is thorny and it's still going up. And again, this is where it depends what you're looking at. But if you just look at atmospheric concentrations, generally speaking, they've been rising. And you can go back and look at the data. There's this cool cyclicality in the data, but by and large, the trend has been undeniably up and to the right over the past 50 years.
Why is it that, I mean, it's such a huge part of the problem and in some ways maybe more addressable to your point. Why is it that it doesn't seem like it gets nearly the airtime as CO2?
My 2 cents is that, like, and we'll get into this when we talk about hardware and software. Everyone tries to clamor for simple answers: team red, team blue, team software, team hardware, like team methane, team CO2. And all of these problems are just very nuanced topics. You just have to pay a little bit of attention and read something instead of getting it on TikTok or social media. And this problem has just become so polarized in many ways that pragmatism around the solutions and having a debate about how much to spend, when, where, and where's that money going to come from, and what the proper public policy apparatus do. Is it regulation? Is it cap and trade? Is it carbon tax? Like how is it that we want to go after this? That causes all this stuff to spin off the rail in many ways. And this conversation, it is never really had. Then there's the technical and physics problem of it. And that is that you're dealing with an invisible, odorless, buoyant gas that exists in much smaller concentrations than when you're having CO2, right? So like when you see this data, what we do with like fence line monitors, you're looking in like the single, double, maybe triple digits of parts per million, right? And so I say that to people, and it seems like an abstract idea, but like 10,000 parts per million is 1%. When you look at the methane or the CO2 levels around some of these facilities, which we do work CO2 places, largely looking at sequestered CO2 for CCUS facilities. But if you're looking around combustion at these facilities and transport, like tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of parts per million CO2, again, that's hazardous for people to breathe in, and it's poisonous. But that's also a reason that anytime people are transporting CO2, they take it much more seriously. If you've ever read about a CO2 leak, it's quite stark in terms of how it all plays out. But the physics are far easier to get your hands around in many ways for CO2.
And then if we dive into like the methane problem itself, so a third of our total problem is human caused methane emissions. How much is that addressable? Kind of leaks and in an oil and gas, how much is it cattle? Like where are the main drivers of that?
I would ask, like, whose data are you looking at, right? And like, generally speaking, if you look at government data, they're going to point to the cattle, and the cattle are a big part of the problem. There's a whole bunch of creative ways being proposed. This is where this is all heavily disputed, because I talk to people in agriculture and they point the finger at oil and gas and coal, right? And they say our estimates are, yeah. And it's just like everyone wants to go around and point it elsewhere. Generally speaking, I think the public policy apparatus is focused on the oil and gas space. They have an easier way to monetize the product than they do, obviously, cows walking around a farm. Rightfully, wrongfully, obviously, that industry understandably gets frustrated about it. Why are you picking on us when there's a larger source of the problem over there? So generally speaking, it's agriculture, then oil and gas, coal, landfills is another huge area of methane problems, and then industrial facilities, places that consume or transport natural gas. So those are the big sources of it, but it's how you go about solving it. Each one of those is quite different.
The leaks themselves, when we're talking about kind of these industrial sources, what's the right sort of visual? Are we talking about like outdated infrastructure that's kind of breaking down and these leaks present themselves? Is it human error? Like where are these coming from?
Yeah. At first, I would say like leaks has a connotation that like, this is abnormal, right? So we always talk in terms of emissions. So like we'll span the gamut. Like, is the cow who's emitting methane, is it leaking? Like, or is it just burping, right? Like, I mean, yeah, exactly. But most people would be like, oh, that's just a burp. If you go in the oil and gas space, they have pieces of equipment that are designed to emit methane, like a pneumatic device. It's designed, it's built to emit methane to the atmosphere. Why? Because it's in pursuit of another purpose, which is like the actuation of a valve. And then in landfills, if you weren't to put like the tarp and the cover over it and wells and data collection system, it would just emit methane naturally. It only becomes like a leak, I guess, in a lot of people's mind, once you actually do put the collection kit on there and then one of the pipes ruptures or there's a hole in the tarp. But the leaks, I mean, they span, if you go to the leak mindset, span huge magnitudes. So like a cow burping, like not that big, but the cow's out there 24/7 and there's thousands of its friends out there doing the exact same thing, and it starts that up. And then in the gas space, you have these pinhole, itsy tiny cracks that are hard for even any technology to detect. And then you can have something as bad as a well blowout, which is just like an uncapped well, which is very, very rare, but like that's the worst thing. And probably some of the larger emissions that you see when you go on public satellite, the landfill space. Those can just be huge, right? Because you have these huge landfills. Like there's some stuff in India, which is quite wild, just how large the emissions can be. Not to pick on them, but they just don't have the same regulations. They have a huge population, all that, waste has to go somewhere. So it can be from itsy to huge, right? One of the things people have historically done is they say, and this is smart, let's focus on the bad problem. One of the things that we saw in the early days, and this is really where the advent of hardware comes in, it's so important, is they were unable to really measure a lot of the lower end of the spectrum, or at least measure with good temporal resolution, meaning looking around the clock, not just snapshot here or there. And I oftentimes say that's like saying like there's no bacteria before you have a microscope. Like the hotel room looked clean, and then you go in and shine the light, and you're like, whoa, it looks quite different. And so this is the advent of hardware and why it's so important, but you can only make so much sense of what the hardware tells you. That's where the other leg of the race has to take over.
A high level understanding of what you did coming into this was addressing these sort of unintentional leaks. I mean, I was picturing like pipe junctions leaking and you're monitoring flow rates and stuff
Totally.
Is that kind of a portion of it that Canary's focused on?
Definitely a huge portion of it, right?
Okay.
And it's kind of, but I would say, and the reason let's start on that portion, and this is just important clarifier for the audience. When we're talking about emissions or leaks, like this is not, don't necessarily think of this as like a feel good ESG protecting the world type story, or don't think of that in isolation. let's just get like frank. This is somebody's product, right? That they're emitting to the atmosphere. If they can make money off of it, it has a part of positive ROI, great, they'll do it. Oftentimes, this indicates operational issues. I always tell this analogy to staff here. When you see like the old truck on the road and the smoke coming out of the tailpipe, that guy doesn't need to care about emissions. He doesn't need to care about air quality. I mean, maybe he should, but what I can tell you is his engine's not running. It's burning oil, most likely. And he can either take the truck in, take it worked on his terms, or he can just be broken down on the side of the road when he's trying to make it to an important meeting or a life event or whatever else. And so I'm saying this because emissions in and of themselves coming from a piece of equipment can be indicative of something. They often are, right? Something's corroding, something's breaking, an engine's not running in spec. They can also be the origin of a field mistake. Something was assembled wrong, a hatch wasn't closed. These are things that then can also present safety issues. Remember, methane is an explosive gas, right? And so if you have it hanging around and someone drives a truck too close, obviously that's running, or there's a spark of any way, that can cause an issue as well. So this bucket it goes far beyond this emissions and leaks bucket. It goes far beyond just thinking about this from a planetary standpoint and what's good for the environment, what's good for us, what makes it a more sustainable future. There's just this whole dollars and cents pragmatic approach to taking this stuff seriously.
I take it your customers aren't motivated by saving the planet necessarily. It's about this is operational efficiency, kind of saving cost, improving safety.
It's all the above. I mean, like some of them made pledges to their investors that they're going to reduce their emissions. It's like some of them specific methane pledges. Some of them operate in states, Colorado, California, to a lesser extent Pennsylvania, where the public population takes this stuff very seriously. So if you want to be a good operator of a landfill and gas facility, whatever it is, like it's good to take it seriously. And then we get into the whole host of other considerations as well that folks are thinking about that I just went through. So it's not that they're only focused on ROI and the bottom line. There are reasons either because those make their way into the bottom line or just an easier way to do business where it makes sense to think about this from a sustainability lens as well.
This is founded by two people with finance backgrounds. It sounds like you initially were on team hardware, like building sensors, building these kind of custom IoT sensors. I'm really curious to understand kind of why that was the right solution at the time or felt like the right solution at the time, and then what you've learned since then. That's kind of, it sounds like helped evolve the company to be more focused on being hardware agnostic and the software platform.
Yeah. So the short answer is because they didn't exist. We would speak to these investors like, why don't you just scrape the data? I would say from where? Satellites. It's like, and especially at that time, the emissions had to be so big to see them from these far out satellites that they were, and they weren't necessarily geared specifically to methane. There's stuff now that's much more tuned for it. So the data didn't exist. And so we had to find a way to get the data if we wanted to build any form of software on the back. That's the short answer. As you move forward, the harder part of the problem is not necessarily like building the device to sense for methane, although it's hard. It's what do you do with all the information? And we build these physics-based models that work backwards to quantify the emissions. When we say quantify, we're talking about how many kilograms per hour of methane came from where to arrive at this exact place at this exact. So to explain this often, state an analogy to folks, it's like riding a boat in a lake and you see like an oil slick on the water. And you have to think and understand in the blink of a second, did that come from a boat that's just driving by, the guy who just drove by? Or did it come from that dock all the way across the lake and someone actually spilled the whole can of oil in the water? And by doing this, you're looking at which boat was driving which direction and which way the currents are. And you can back into, in theory, where it came from and how much was poured in the water to arrive at that exact point. Meaning, was it a little bit of oil in the water that was put nearby, or was it a huge amount of water put far away? And you're doing that faster than real time, which is kind of a weird thing to think about, around the clock from this very sparse data set. And then ultimately, as we move forward in time, there's two reasons that we focus more and more on the software. One is because there is no right or wrong answer kind of in the absolute world until you define what it is that you're trying to do for hardware. So people will be like, which one's better, satellite or ground-based? What are you trying to do? Ground-based sensor only sees the emissions at that one site. Someone has to let you on that site to install that equipment. Satellite, they're going to look at what they're doing at that site no matter what. You can see the whole world there, most of the world, I should say. And so they're just different, but the emissions have to be huge to see them from outer space, and you only get small snapshots in time, second here, second there, every few months, if you will. So they're just on different ends of the spectrum. They're not better or worse, they're different when they burst problem. The second reason is because there are other people who are just going to be far better than us. They specialize in hardware, no hardware. This is where the comparative advantage angle comes in. At the beginning, we had to do it all because none of it existed.
Nobody was doing
And
it.
that is correct. And now you've just had this flood of interest in space, and more people, and with more and more money become more specialization. And so we've really chosen a niche that I think we're quite good at, and always trying to improve.
The sensors you set out to create, or something equivalent or analogous, are being developed by other people and sold to your customers who are installing those sensors. And your focus now is ingesting the data from those and then providing the kind of insights based on that data.
Yes, but I'll say we still help people develop technology in the hardware world all the time because they don't understand the performance specifications that they need in order to get actual information out of the software. It's this weird trade-off. We're working with someone right now who's doing it as well, and we're pushing on certain parameters that they thought didn't really matter. And we start showing them in the data how the stuff that they thought that mattered in terms of performance details don't really make that much of a difference. But here's some things that make a difference. So I'll just give you one, background levels of methane are roughly 1.8, 1.9 parts per million. And it may seem ridiculous to see down at or below that number, meaning your device can see methane concentration down to, let's say, 1.5 or 1 ppm. But you want to be very accurate around that range for this idea called the contribution. Meaning if you can't see small upticks over background, you can't add up all those little pennies that add up to quite a lot of money over time. And if you only begin to see it, say, 3 parts per million, you miss a lot between 1.9 and 3, let's say, and that adds up over time. They didn't think about it. They were thinking about how you originally think about this must be a huge leak. That's all our only goal. But then I was explaining to them, you can't use this for accounting purposes. You can only use it for leak detection purposes. They're like, oh, no, that's not what we want. So, and again, I can throw another dozen of these at you. They don't know because they exist in hardware world. And the software people just take data in from sensors and they don't understand the capabilities. So they're spitting out quantified emissions numbers. And they're like, look, your emissions are extremely low. You missed all the pennies, right? And so they're not that low because you were missing this huge gap. And this is why I think it's not hardware or software. It's how do you understand the trade-off between both?
Actually, having that kind of initial experience in the hardware world makes your product more valuable, makes you more of a sort of value add partner to your clients. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also makes you more valuable to the ecosystem. You can talk to a hardware manufacturer and help work with them to refine it and almost create a partnership on that.
I just want to make sure I understand one thing you're saying about the sort of the accounting aspect of this and counting the pennies. Is that really about, this is how much product we're losing through unintended emissions? Like it's just the pennies associated with the value of that methane we're losing?
Or intended, right? Remember how I talked about the pieces of equipment like a pneumatic?
Right.
You have an assumption based on an engineering calculation. Is it emitting more than that, less than that, or about that? And you have no way of even having an understanding of that if you can't see those very low levels of methane concentration. That's what I mean by accounting. And again, all of this stuff, nothing's 100% accurate, but roughly 4,000 kilograms of methane came from the site during the month of July. Let's just say that's what it is. Versus we thought we'd emit 3,000 or 5,000. If you aren't able to see down low levels of concentration of methane, you're not able to accurately, which may be fine if your goal is to just tell me when something really bad is going wrong. Give me quick information. That's of immense value as well. And you as a corporate may say that's higher ROI to me than trying to count all these pennies. I just care if it's generally in the ballpark. And to do that, I want to avoid the really bad stuff.
What different kinds of data are you ingesting? It sounds like sort of methane concentration from sensors measuring that, maybe satellite data. Are you also looking at things like just the sort of operational data, like when valves are opening and closing and, flow rates that sensors that already exist on these facilities?
Yeah, that's a huge part of the value as well. I always say oftentimes you have much of the information that they need in their personal life or business to solve the problem. They're just not viewing it through the lens of the problem, right? And so these companies are largely using operational data to understand when they need to send someone out to redo the well, right? Work over is what it's called. How often they need someone to pick up the oil from the tanks. How often they need someone to pick up the water from the tanks. When a piece of equipment may be breaking down, right? These are all very important things for these facilities cost tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Like you need to know how it's running. What they're not thinking about is, geez, are there a lot of emissions coming from this tank? They just haven't been viewing the data. And it just takes a different lens of thinking. You have to start wrapping multiple data points together to get to that outcome. But you can get to some sort of understanding. It also provides massive amount of augmentation to other data collection techniques as well. And really where I think all this goes is this is a really important point to hit on. The real innovation is moving from just measurement to operational intelligence. I said it to one of the employees like this. Let's just say, Dylan, your blood pressure is 160 over 100. It's like most people I say that to, they're like, what does that even mean? And I would say, that's high, right? And they would be like, okay. And what I'm saying is the doctor's there to say, Dylan, it's 160 over 100. That's high. You're eating too much salt, or you need to lose weight, or like whatever. Take this blood pressure medicine until you can do those two things, and we'll try to get you off. It's that so what? That operational intelligence of like, what do I do with this information? I see there's methane coming from the tanks. What does that mean? So what? And I think that's one of the hardest parts that we found, especially because the domain expertise is so different from talking to people who look at small concentrations of methane, from people who build these huge oil and gas facilities or operate a landfill. Like they all speak different languages. And really you have to have this coordinated mindset if you're really going to start solving this problem in kind of profitable way, right? Where it makes more money for them to stop the emissions than it does to measure the problem or implement the solution.
Okay. So you're playing the doctor in that,
Kind of
this analogy. Yeah.
Yeah. So where we're really trying to go is like, so step one is like your blood pressure. Step two is that's high. So that's where you start getting into the relative metric. People speak in so much in relative metrics, whether they know it or not. And then the third is what's the so what, right? And so the software is now rolling into bucket number 3. And that's where there's some cool stuff that happens in AI world. And it's a lot of it can just be inferred by comparative metrics, right? So rather than me just telling he needs to eat less salt or run more or lose weight or take this medicine, you're just saying in this situation, people have similar blood pressure generally do this. And those who have 120 over 80, let's call that standard, generally do this, right? And from that, you can infer like which one's fit for you, rather than me saying, you must take this, you must lose weight, you give kind of an option based on what other people have done.
What it was like starting a hardware company as coming from a finance background. One of my,
God, I can tell you, it's just totally kicked me. Like it's,
okay.
My problem with it is like I move really fast and hardware and software innovation cycles are just so far off from one another.
Right.
It's just nuts. Like you got to spec out for like where you want this thing to be in a year, and I want to change it every week, right? It's like, sorry, like we got to design the PCB. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, what? Why didn't you include this? And then I vectored too far on the other end of the spectrum, where it's like you design a PCB and it has like every bell and whistle, but it's like it's more things to go wrong, and like how affordable is it going to be? So it forces you so much more to choose what it is that you really want, and that's something else. There's a level of discipline that exists in hardware that I don't think people really appreciate. I really don't. Like you have to think ahead. You have to prioritize. Dollars and cents matter. Like when people say execution, I think hardware got a lot of love, by the way, at least from more so from in COVID world. Because suddenly it's like, what do you mean we have to shut down the whole Ford factory line for this one little itsy to get one? All right. The car won't run without that thing, that one little chip, or like capacitors, resistors. Like you're just like, wait, what? This is what's stalling us. So we ran into massive issues in COVID. It took years to dig back up from putting like substandard components in and rushing development. So anyways, when I learned, it's hard. I'm not that good at it. There's people far, far, far better probably all of your listeners. And it's also so necessary. I was saying to Jay, who you may have met, while there is like this, they both have to coexist because they both do different things, hardware and software. If you have to think about it from like Maslow's hierarchy, hardware has to come before software. You don't have something to produce or compute the data, then the data is worthless. I think
Something's
this
got
is
to
another
interface
thing
with the
that gets
real
lost.
world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny that you say that. I was going on a discussion about that yesterday with a colleague. More and more people don't want to live in the real world, but that's a topic for. It's like I'm
Right.
friends with the chatbot. It's like, have fun with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for saying that. I always love hearing people talk about how hard hardware is. So,
I mean, do you have a different experience?
no, I agree.
Tell me. You have it all solved. So you're hired.
And you've got you're totally, you're not doing any hardware anymore.
No,
Canary
that's
is not
not
a
true.
hardware. Yeah.
We still
Oh,
have
you are. Okay.
tons of hardware on our balance sheet because our
Okay.
business model was like you build this stuff and people lease it from you, put it out
I see.
around
So you
these
have
facilities.
you have Canary hardware installed at customers.
And now we'll sell
there's-
it. And then we own a company out in California, which does amazing work. And that's a totally different business. And that's how we find leaks throughout your neighborhood, which is really
Oh,
cool stuff.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a totally different approach. Now the sensor's on the move, which is even harder in many ways to start get your head around. And then the data sequencing on how that all gets solved is also much longer as well. But it's fascinating. And most people, they're like, I ask the question to even people in the space. I'm like, how do you think they find the leaks in your neighborhood? Never thought. Right. And it's like, yeah, we do that too. So that's another piece. So yeah, we still have hardware.
So we talked a little bit about kind of the relationship you have with your customers. What are you actually selling them? Like, what's the model or what's the product? Is it a service model or?
Yeah, it's software as a service. So like, let's just say that they're not getting hardware from us, which is increasingly the norm. What it would be is, okay, great. You have these point sensors. You already purchased them. They're around 100 of your facilities. Great. The models that we have that convert that data collected by the sensor into more actionable information. Blood pressure is high, let's call it. We have the best of an independent blind testing. They do certain things that other models don't. Every single model also has a trade-off as well. Some can be more accurate, some can be more reactive. It's just pros and cons. Then we have the ability to integrate that in with, you also fly planes. That's great. With taking that data, now you can see that data on top of each other. So when the plane flies over, you can see the exact thing that the sensors were saying at the same time. We can then combine that with everything that you have to report into the regulatory agencies. These are called inventories. How many pneumatic devices do you have? What your tank emissions are? How many leaks you found at the sites? We can then populate the regulatory report. It's another piece that we can do and kind of integrate that whole chain for you. So we take in data from sensors around the site, satellites, planes, make sense out of it for you, combine it with other data, either operational data or things that you got to report to the government. Combine it with that so you can have more insights into what may be driving your problem and then help you with either voluntary or regulatory mandated regulatory reports. Streamline the whole process instead of using an army of consultants. And we also do something similar distribution side, which is how you get gas to your home, your neighborhood. It's just the collection methodology and the follow-up action looks a little bit.
You mentioned kind of these regulatory reports. How the regulatory landscape changing, and is it kind of helping or hurting what you guys are up to?
It's weird because, like, I'll tell you what 2019 and 2020 were like. It was so slow, and then all of a sudden, people, you remember what happened? The world changed. It felt like very quickly on the back of George Floyd and other social dynamics, and all of a sudden, 2020 and 2021, or at least on a relative basis, the busiest years that we've ever had. And there was nothing in the way of regulatory requirements. You're coming off the first Trump administration. Biden administration was just getting its feet underneath of it, so hadn't done anything whatsoever. And basically people felt almost kind of the social pressure and pressure from investors to really do stuff. I'll say right now, there's definitely a feeling among some potential customers that I don't really need to do anything. I need to watch the bottom line, respect the decision. Again, you'd say call it near term, long term. You could say it's smart in the long term if you think all of this is going away. I mean, anyone caring about nothing. And then there's plenty of companies out there that are continuing to say, like, listen, like this is a very long term, multi-decade process, and we're just going to stay the course because we can make more money if we recover more product. And by the way, we promised our shoppers we're going to do this. So Let's just do it. So it's what am I saying? It has actually created more fragmentation from top to bottom under customer preferences.
What's on the Canary roadmap? What does the future hold for you guys? I saw an article that quoted you as saying plan to measure other greenhouse gases in the future as well. And I think actually you mentioned earlier when we were just chatting about monitoring CO2 for in sequestration sites.
Yeah, CO2. I mean, at least if you look at I think that name is Big Beautiful Bill. They've actually incentivized CCUS more. Hate it, love it. I'm not weighing in on whether or not it's good or bad. It's more if it's going to be moved, like how do we make sure it stays in the pipe, especially if taxpayers are going to be subsidizing it. So we can do that. There's also the world of hazardous air pollutants, which we don't really do anything now, but it's increasingly growing in importance. Think about things like ethylene oxide. That may sound very nebulous to your viewers, but it's very carcinogenic. It's used in medical sterilization, and people are really starting to pay attention more, including government agencies. So there's stuff there as well. If you maybe put a fine point on it, though, I think it's utilizing non-speciated equipment or specific equipment, meaning when I say speciated, looking for just methane to start to infer what's going on that's driving methane emissions or CO2 emissions or nitrous oxide emissions or anything else. This is how you, I think, increase the scale of what you do dramatically and also make it imminently more affordable. I think one of the problems that people have is they have trouble stomaching, I should say, the cost, but also the operational costs on a go-forward basis, and then making sense of all of these different data sets. They need someone just to say, like, tell me what's going on and tell me what I need to do. And oftentimes you get the best insights from leveraging information that you have, not they have, not that we would have.
So you're saying measuring or inferring nitrous oxide emissions without actually directly measuring nitrous oxide emissions.
Methane is like the main place we'll start on this, and then you can start branching out from there. Yes. It's just a huge area where you can start making a lot of progress.
And what makes that scalable, I guess, is that a lot of the data you would need then maybe already exists, or these facilities are already outfitted with the sensors you need. It's just about kind of using your models and what you've learned from other facilities to make very educated guesses about how much methane emissions there are without directly measuring it.
The hardest part is coming up with the training. So you have to collect the training data alongside other forms of data and get the weeds on what that looks like. And then when you start doing that, you can then say, if this moves, right? And you're kind of looking at this inference modeling approach. There's also more deterministic modeling approaches that you can do that are more process flow simulations, which is a totally different category, but either of them require data that the customers are currently producing themselves. But to be clear, you can't just get a smart person off the street and say, hey, take your data here and tell me how much methane emissions are being emitted from the site. They may be able to show you specific times where they know there was methane emissions, but they're going to miss a lot because they don't have the training data. You have to have one before the other. Back to our analogy, hardware before software in terms of the hierarchy.
Right. Got it. So part of the value you're kind of generating over time is more and more training data.
You have to have something else to relate it back to, right? Which in this case is the operational data. And many companies are very, cards close to the chest as it relates to that data, which I would understand, right? Like I don't want to hand over all my emails to the entire internet. And so that's kind of one of the barriers to entry that you see. The other thing that they'll do is they'll say we're going to do this ourselves, and they'll start building it off of modeling approaches that will lead them in the opposite of the right direction, the wrong direction. Right? They think it's good data, but they're really training on a whole bunch of null values. And so any sort of, even if they're on the right path of like the type of model to choose, which there's a variety of, they're going to struggle because the training data is not there. And so it just dampers the entire model.
What's your vision for the future of Canary? What kind of impact do you want to have? What does it look like, and on what time scale?
I've said before, and I could be wrong, is like I'll go back and like look at seatbelts, right? And like what people, you can't believe, like, what if the car drives into a river or I'm going to die, I can't get out? Like, how much do we ever think about any of that? We don't think a thing of it. We don't think a thing of airbags. We don't think a thing of any of this stuff that we have in our modern world. I was talking to a much older person and they were talking to me about leaded gasoline. which obviously I knew about, but it was like hard for me to fully wrap my head around. And so I hope that this whole issue at some point in my lifetime of methane emissions looks something akin to leaded gasoline or a world without seatbelts, or like the kids look at us and they say, wait, wasn't that the product that you guys used to use back then? Yeah. And so wait, you were polluting the planet with the product? Like, yeah. And so that's where I hope we get to. And I think with time we will, as the understanding improves, as the economics change, as everything as customers focus on this more. Like that's my end state. I think we're many decades away from that happening for a lot of reasons. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope it comes faster for the sake of the planet, honestly, but also sake of the companies themselves. Like I said, this is not a feel-good ESG story. This is not losing your product. This is catching engines before they break down. This is fewer safety incidents that may happen. It's catching mistakes that happen. It's like, I think many folks, this is just a different way of thinking about it. The one analogy I'll give you is if you look at many industries, safety used to be considered kind of this soft, hand wavy thing. And I'll go and visit these companies and we'll have a meeting, and the meeting will start like this. We're going to have a safety moment. The first time you experience, you're looking around and someone's like, can anyone tell me where the closest fire exit is? And I'm just like, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And my point for highlighting this is like, this just shows you the degree to which that they have internalized this idea of safety. This occurs at like mining companies, gas companies, utilities, like all these things that live in the physical world, not the digital world. And I say kudos to them, but it took a series of kind of very difficult learning events where people were hurt or even potentially died to get there. And man, I'll give them credit for institutionalizing that culture. I know no meeting around here at Canary starts off like that, and maybe it should, right? But my point is like, they've really taken it to that level. And I fully foresee a world where the people who are handling methane in some way, shape, or form will kind of view this story in a similar way. But very seriously.
But yeah, I am a little curious about that.
So how do you measure emissions throughout a neighborhood?
Yeah. And like, what are we even talking about? So like everybody's got gas coming to their house. Are we talking about, these must be unintended emissions. We're talking about leaks at this point, right? They got to be like super low concentration.
So you're good. You're already on the right track. So as a result, like you're going to need an instrument that is able to see very small amounts of methane. So that's issue number one. Now you're in a car that's driving 30 or 40 miles an hour. And I can just tell you for like point sensors around the facility, that's like a box collecting concentration data when I say point sensors. When the wind is 30 to 40 miles an hour, we often assume that you can't really see anything. This is what it is every single time. That's even before you add on the other one. The other piece is that there's also wind flowing around. It's a turbulent wind flow. Anyone who stands next to a street can tell you that. So like you have that aspect of it as well. And then to just make it all the harder, you have natural sources of methane. Sewage is like one of the, compost is another one. So, and
it's like very noisy data.
That barely emits anything, right? So like, who cares? Well, remember, we're far away. The leaks are small. The wind field is very difficult as well. And so like just adding a little bit of compost. So I'll kind of go through it. One, you use a extremely sensitive device. So if you think about like the precision of these point sensors that we'll use around the site, maybe it's like 800 parts per billion at 1 hertz, something like that, right? And that means that at sampling once per second, you can see like small movements down to 800 parts per billion, below 1 part per million. As you average those values, you reduce that number, but then you reduce any of the signal that you may have now. When you go to like what we use in the utility space, the stuff that this company in California produces, it's at 1 second, it's 1 part per billion. It's 800 times more sensitive. So that's piece number one. There's very accurate ultrasonic anemometers specifically mounted on top of these vehicles. So you're always zeroing out the car speed itself so you can get an accurate wind vector, which is complicated in and of itself. And then if you think that's precise measurements for methane, here's the real key, is you're also measuring ethane. And you're measuring it down, it's even below 1 part per billion. And so that is really important because every utility knows the exact ratio of methane to ethane that they have on their lines. And you're looking for that exact correlation. If I were to show you the software, it makes sense. And so when you see a small uptick, let's say for something and there is no ethane, you know that that is from a biogenic source like compost or sewage gas, as you will. Then we have this software, paints these little Pac-Mans, and it tells you kind of the corner of the street or the side of the street that it's on. And then there's another piece of kit that people go out on foot and then they try to locate the exact leak and tag it. And then someone comes back later. I oversimplified that whole process by a factor of 3 because there are all these service contractors where the data is passing around back and forth, back and forth. So you need a very coordinated software platform as you hand it off. And by the way, you got to do it well because this is really important. If something were to go wrong, they need to understand the chain of custody and who did or did not do their jobs along that path. So important stuff. And so looking at it, and then you can take all that data and do some really cool analytics of understanding, like, is it the steel pipe, cast iron pipe, plastic pipe that are driving these emissions? Which part of town has a problem? You can see some weird cyclicality and some of this stuff certain days of the week, maybe more likely to have emissions than other days. How could that be possible? People have barbecues, let's say on Sunday as they're having a few beers and forget to turn off the grill. So there's all sorts of stuff that's starting to come out in the data. And I don't think it's such a nebulous topic because I don't know about you, I flip the light switch and if the power comes on, I never really think about it. That's how most people are. We all take the physical world so for granted. And I think most people, they're just like the gas comes into the home and I never really think, oh, there are leaks. Oh yeah, there must be leaks, of course, but like, how do they find them? And this is one of the ways that they really go about finding them. It can't really be done by satellites and planes because they're so small. I don't know about you, but my family doesn't want 800 feet above the house, like a plane zooming over. So like planes are awesome for transmission, which is like longer pipelines that hold more gas. But flying over neighborhoods, it's tough to do. Some jurisdictions will have people walk on foot. You can imagine how much longer that takes as well. And then the sensitivity of the equipment isn't there. So it's kind of this counterintuitive thing where they can actually miss more. So this approach has really taken over in many ways.
So like utilities are rolling trucks that have this sensor package on them and just kind of roving around neighborhoods looking for
they drive at night.
higher
That's why you never
concentration.
see them.
Really?
Yeah, the wind is calmer. The people aren't on the road. So the wind field is a little bit more stable. There are not as many cars driving by.
Wow, that's
Changes the
fascinating.
wind blades.
I had no idea. And that whole like methane ratio thing is really interesting. It makes a lot of sense. But
You gotta have it. Yeah. Often some of the cooler things you'll see is when you see these cross constituents in gases. Like you'll see some stuff even with methane and other compounds that are not methane, and they can be indicative of like engine failure or different things going wrong in a piece of equipment. There's a whole bunch of value in looking at multiple forms of data, which brings us back to hardware.
okay, I have 3 questions that I ask everybody at the end of each episode. The first is, how optimistic or pessimistic are you about the future of the planet and why?
Both. And that is pessimistic and then optimistic. I think Americans in particular, human beings, they don't really act, they overreact, as people often say. And so I think this whole thing about climate change is going to feel like an afterthought. And there will be a year, I can't tell you when, in 5 to 10 years, will be a cataclysmic year. There'll be 4 or 5 category storms that hit. You'll see flooding throughout the Midwest. You'll see wildfires raging in the West. The cost will be $1.5 trillion, and people are going to look up and say, what are we doing? And then you're going to have an oversteering. You're just going to see tons of government money flowing into it. There's going to be subsidies up the wazoo. There'll be plenty of inefficiency and waste, but you can be one thing, sure, the problem will be solved. I say this about COVID. People made jokes about it at the very beginning, and suddenly we spent $6 trillion to send people checks to stay at home for well over a year. In many cases, we could argue whether that was the correct use of data, and something as horrific as 9/11. People died, but $7 trillion were spent on the back of that, even though there was warnings that this exact thing was going to happen for years and years. So I'm pessimistic, and then I think it flips into optimism. Exactly what that gradient looks like in time, I can't tell you, but people are only ever really caring about things on a population level when their back is against the wall.
Once it gets bad enough. Who's another company or individual doing something to address climate change that's inspiring you?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think stuff in the electrical world is just amazing. The data is like so much higher frequency. And those problems are very thorny. Yet again, it's just, there's no right or wrong answer. So again, you could go through like a host of different companies right now. I think it's on the battery side, because if you can crack the battery side, you solve tons of problems. So that's everything from Tesla to Form Energy, but even there's that whole ecosystem. There's the fusion, holy grail. There's the geothermal stuff. I wouldn't say it's any one, but people who are working to think about energy storage or novel ways of electricity generation, so not solar, not wind, is a pretty cool one.
What advice do you have for someone not working in climate today who wants to do something to help?
Oh, well, the question is if they're going to work in it. I mean, we'll break it into two parts. It's hard, right? And I mean no disrespect by this to anyone. Like most people, myself included, like I care. I spend so much of my day thinking about it, talking about it. But the truth is like a lot of us live our daily lives like somewhat divorced from this reality. So like, do I still order packages on Amazon? I got a 2-year-old kid. Sometimes I need something and I need it tomorrow. Like I don't have time to run the store. His bedtime is in 20 minutes. Yes, I do. Is that good for the planet? No, it's not. Right. And so does that make me a bad person? It's up for you to judge. Maybe, maybe not. But this gets into the point of what should they do? I think it's oftentimes people want a solution, but they don't want it to affect them. And I don't really see any way out of this problem by constantly saying that it needs to be on someone else. It needs to be on us collectively. And so just like thinking logically about this is really the way to go. This does not mean like there was this idea that persisted for way too long that it was like climate change was an individual issue. Meaning like if you care about climate change, why don't you drive your electric car or take your reusable bag to the grocery store? It's like, well, if you care about safety, then why don't you hire your own personal security guard, right? Like, well, that's different. Well, is it right? Like, and so I guess what I'm saying is like I often encounter many people in cities that have lived in on the East Coast and West Coast where they have this idea of like it's a really big deal for climate change, but like they don't want anything to impact them. Like, let me just give you a practical example. People will say, "Oh my God, we just need more renewables," and then it comes time to build the power line. But that's going to ruin my view. Are you kidding? So like I view the biggest enemies of climate change quite differently than many people. NIMBYism is one of the worst things. This idea that you're never going to have to look at anything and everything's going to be the exact same as it was tomorrow is like my whole thing. So if you really care and you're not going to work in climate on a day-to-day basis, I would really try to get you to be practical on a public policy perspective, because the idea that you love renewables and we need more, but somehow you're never going to see a power line, you're living in a fantasy land, right? Like this is this practical thing. And then people who speak about issues around climate, I always really encourage them to be pragmatic. People have so much else going on in their life. They don't want another person wagging their finger at them, telling them that they're a bad person for what it is that they're doing. Explain, rather than talking to them about how this type of food is destroying the planet and they're a horrible person, tell them that this other type of food is actually going to be far more nutritious for their child, right? Tell them about how this vehicle, they never have to deal with price volatility and it lasts for twice as long as this other vehicle. Explain to them how this type of heating or cooling results in a much lower electricity bill. I think too oftentimes people have this moral purity as it relates to issues around climate, and it's really repulsive to folks in much of the country. And if you're like me, I know we desperately need a solution to many of these issues, and I just always encourage people to be pragmatic in terms of the solutions. They will be in some way, shape, or form suboptimal in some way too, and you also just want to dialogue with people in a respectful way, because they have a lot more constraints in their life than just climate. You're trying to afford daycare and food on the table and get the kids to school.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. Will, that was really fun. I learned a lot. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Dylan, thank you.
Hardware to Save a Planet is brought to you by Synapse. To find out more about us and how we develop hardware solutions for the world's most ambitious companies, head to synapse.com. And then make sure to search for Hardware to Save a Planet in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you like to listen. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Synapse, thanks for listening.